And there are two pretty widely held views in the United States right now, which is part of what makes this debate interesting. One is, I think, can only be reasonably characterized as techno-optimism. And this is the one where you get such large productivity gains, you're never going to have to work again, basic income will be high, and it'll take care of everything. And when I asked, and I'm actually not kidding about this, when I asked one of the world's leading tech AI entrepreneurs, what did he think the future of employment will be for the rest of us, or for everyone, he said, I've got the quote up there, "We will all be gods." I think he actually meant that he will be a god and the rest of us will be trying to be gods, but hence my interest in religion this morning. I was wondering where that's going. Now, on the other hand, of course, we've got some well-founded or extremely articulate techno-pessimism, which is that it's going to go very fast. There's an acceleration of some dimensions of this technological change, maybe faster. If you think about ChatGPT and how fast that's spread around the world, I think it's fair to say we've never seen anything quite like that. Perhaps that will be destroying jobs faster than we can create them. Perhaps we're looking at some form of mass unemployment, underemployment, changes in the terms of employment, and there's not going to be big offsetting income gains, which is something I'll dig into, because productivity goes up in a way that workers benefit from. Now, I will tell you my bottom line here, just in case you do fall asleep, which is it's not going to make that much difference in terms of overall productivity growth. I think the estimates of transformation on total factor productivity growth are, for the most part, quite exaggerated. But you may well get more job market polarization. Honestly, that would not be a big surprise, given our starting point, which I'll talk about. So that'll be a widening of income gaps in industrialized countries like the United States, like the UK, other parts of Europe. And I think there's also big concerns, although much less data, and this is a much more speculative statement, about global inequality, both within lower income, middle income countries and across countries. We could talk about that, but I think that's a very big open area for further research. But the key point, however, of our book, oh look, somebody left a copy here. It's my copy. Is that it doesn't, there's nothing, I don't think I heard anybody this morning express any kind of technological determinism view. Okay. But you do sometimes, it sometimes comes through one way or another. People say, well, technology changed in this way, and therefore we got this kind of society. Our view on AI, our view is that technological determinism is a very shaky proposition in general, but when it comes to AI, it absolutely does not have to be that way. There is a lot of choices that we can make, that we are making, that we will make, like it or not, about how we use the technology, what we do, what we don't do with the technology, and therefore what kind of society we develop. And specifically, at the rhetorical level, and all of these debates obviously have a very important rhetorical dimension, our branding of this, or the words that we're trying to get into the mix are, is your AI going to be pro-worker or not? What does pro-worker AI mean? Can we really deliver it? What are the policies that could back that up? That's what I want to explore with you over the next 40 minutes. And of course, to get to that, we're going to have to think a little bit about who makes this kind of decision, on what basis in the United States, in the UK, and anywhere else. Now, the title of the talk is Technology Inequality Over the Last Millennium and in the Age of AI. Usually I have to apologize slightly to my audience for being broad enough to take on 1,000 years. Today I feel like I'm only dealing with recent modern history compared to the rest of you. I'm absolutely very comfortable with that. And it's a book, the book's called Power and Progress. It's joint with Doron Esimoglu, who's a professor at MIT. And this comes out of work that the two of us do with David Autor in the Shaping the Future of Work initiative at MIT, housed in the economics department there. So one version of history looks like this. This is not my graph, not my version of history. It's a very nice visualization taken from Max Roser from The World in Data. But it sort of encapsulates this notion that not much happens, and I understand you're well aware of the nuances and why that's not quite right. Not much happens for thousands of years, and then there's a bit of a pickup to 1800, and when we have an acceleration in technological change, and of course there's lots of questions about what happens beyond the now, with some people saying we're on the brink of a further acceleration. Now, the reason I put this up here is I'm absolutely confident, based on first-hand experiences, this is the prevailing view, not just in Silicon Valley, however you want to define that, but also among people who make policy around technology in the United States. Invent more new things is what you should do. Faster is better, the quicker you can move up the scale. Other people are always biting at your heels. In many of these conversations in Washington, if you discuss anything at all to do with regulation of technology that anybody in the industry thinks might slow them down a bit, someone at the back of the room will say, I promise you, China. Yeah, exactly. I got all your votes, so you didn't know, oh, China's coming, right? So do it faster, do it more. And here's the key about AI, the premise or the belief or the argument being put forward by people who want to go full speed ahead. AI can and should accelerate, it's not just a technology itself, but it's going to accelerate the pace of technological change. You've seen this, the Economist magazine, with all due respect to any reporters who snuck in here, is a big exponent of this, that it's going to transform science and invention and therefore help to contribute to the acceleration. Now, I think this view, the view that I just put there, is really quite problematic. Because if you look back over history, so again, 1,000 years, a lot of that, I'm not going to have time to go through all of it, a lot of it's in the book. It is true that technology has improved, technology has changed, and somebody thought it was an improvement, that's why they adopted it, that's why they changed how they did agriculture, that's why they set up a factory. And it is also true that in an average sense, that technology improvement often increases productivity, although I'm going to want to define what productivity means more specifically in a moment. But the question, or where this logic breaks down, and the reason there isn't what we call a productivity bandwagon as a necessary, doesn't necessarily exist, is this idea that workers also benefit from this technology improvement and whatever's happening to productivity. So, for example, if you want to go back and look at the medieval period, as I'm sure you're all aware, was not a period of stagnation and inactivity. It was actually a period where there was plenty of change, including in the technology for agriculture, for mills, for example, for windmills, as a concrete example. Very little of those benefits trickled down, if I can use that expression, to peasants. There was a lot of forced labor. There was surely benefit for the people at the top of the social ladder, including the aristocracy and the clergy, the ability to build tremendous cathedrals, as seen, for example, if you want to go up to Lincoln, tallest building in the world for several hundred years. That was based on improvements in technology, greater productivity, but what happened to the living standards and the real wages of those workers? Well, Bob Allen has done the definitive work on that, as well as a number of other questions today. I think it went up a little bit, but not by very much. Most of the ordinary people did not capture the benefits of that technological change. And if you want to take the most horrendous example, not without some controversy, but I think that we know the sign of this effect, and it absolutely pertains to slavery, which has been mentioned a number of times, and I think we should not forget the prevalence of that in human societies over history. But Eli Whitney invented a cotton gin in the 1790s, which, along with other innovations, made it much easier to cultivate cotton away from the east coast of the United States, and facilitated, so lots of discussion about exactly the role that it played, but it facilitated the movement of that plantation system, or maybe even say the development of what you all know as the pre-Civil War plantation cotton system in the United States, spread across what we now call the Deep South, facilitated by this change in technology. Obviously, the people, the workers involved, who were, many of them started out as slaves on the East Coast in, for example, tobacco farms, their lives, that the families were broken up, there was a forced migration across the South. Working on those plantations was incredibly hard, and at least as far as I can see from looking at the evidence, there's no sign that their lives, the lives of those people working on those plantations, was improving prior to the American Civil War. So is technology a good thing? Is technology improvement a good thing? Well, it depends. It depends on how you use it, and it depends on the social context, and it depends on the power relations that go around it. Now, if we move to the Industrial Revolution, which is obviously a fundamental turning point and something that is hopefully of great interest to every British audience, because you were there or your predecessors were involved. I am here, once again, drawing on Bob Allen's work to address this interesting question of what happened when weaving became mechanized. Now, there is a very important distinction, which I'd like to leave with you and press upon you and leave with you, which is the mechanization of spinning in the mid-18th century, towards the second half of the 18th century, was initially very controversial. People didn't like that. Spinners broke spinning machines. But very quickly they realized that what it did was generate a lot of opportunities for weavers. So the price of spun cotton came down. There was a lot of new opportunities for weaving. There was a lot of prosperity in weaving communities. And actually, we don't have very good data. We don't have the continuous series of weavers' wages. But if we had them, and we do have, Bob can speak for himself. I think we have pretty good anecdotal evidence, indications that wages started out above the level that I'm showing here. They started to come down, and the mechanization of weaving made it much harder to be a hand loom weaver. Actually, the number of people who were hand loom weavers, so they were doing the weaving at home on small machines, the big machines, the weaving machines I'm talking about, were much larger, and they were installed in factories. The factories were not big, perhaps by modern standards, but they would have several hundred workers, rising to 1,000 workers eventually. That changed the economics of being a hand loom weaver. The real wages of hand loom weavers came down. Factory workers' wages go up a little bit, but not by a lot, and not until at least the 1820s. But look at the weighted average of weaving wages. So factory workers, hand loom weavers, weighted by the number of people in each part of each segment of the industry. The weighted average weaving wages fall in the early 19th century and are low until the 1830s, and there's plenty of debate about when in the 1830s this turned around and why and so on. So if I came to you, or if anybody comes to you and says, good news, we've got AI coming, and you're all going to benefit through higher real wages. It's just going to take 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, which is what we're talking about with the Industrial Revolution. In the positive interpretation, I'll get on to some negatives in a minute, I think you should say, well, hold on a minute, why do we have to wait 60 years, right? Aren't we in a better position to understand technology, to manage technology, and to share the benefits of technology than these people in Lancashire and other places were in the early 1800s. So the really interesting question about, for the Industrial Revolution, Maxine Berg is in the audience too, and she's a leading expert on this, and we quote her work with great respect also, is the following, which is absolutely a point of massive contention with the AI industry right now. So obviously, automation, replacing human labor with machines is an integral part of, actually, many of the technological changes that Amy was talking about this morning involve aspects of automation. But the Industrial Revolution is a revolution in terms of bringing previously unprecedented degree of automation to bear. So this displaces workers. Average productivity increases, right? I'm producing more output. I've got fewer workers in my factory than we had before. The marginal productivity of labor doesn't necessarily go up. So if I'm the employer and I'm just thinking, right, how much is this additional person worth to me in terms of what they're going to contribute? Well, that might be less than it was before. We'll come on to trade unions and bargaining for wages in just a moment. What's the working conditions in these factories? They're actually very bad, much worse than the conditions these people experienced previously. At least that's what they said when they were interviewed. For example, the quote here is from one of the parliamentary commissions in the early 1830s. And as I said, wages were low and did not increase. And in addition, you had much tighter worker monitoring. Okay, the picture on the left is Jeremy Bentham's panopticon, which I know was never actually built. It was a vision for very detailed surveillance in prisons, but also in factories. Actually, originally it was a factory model. And it was an inspiration for how many owners and managers thought about running their factories. And the picture on the right is not actually a commentary on the current state of Thames water. It is a commentary on the state of the water in the Thames in 1858, which was absolutely horrible. So people have been brought into cities. Living conditions in cities were terrible. The provision of public goods was almost non-existent. And their real wages, by any measure, even taking out this impact of disease, had not risen, at least not starting to rise until the very beginning of this, let's say, 1840s, 1850s. So that doesn't sound very good in terms of the impact of technology and the benefits of the Industrial Revolution. How did we get to where we are today, which is obviously not the squalor of 1858, except for the Thames water joke? Maybe I shouldn't have made that joke after lunch. I'm sorry, Wendy. So it turns out that there were multiple paths of development available in the industrial age, as well as just as much as there are today. And the example that makes this connects this, at least for my American audiences, is in the 1851 Great Exhibition, held not too far from here. The countries of the world were invited to send their most proud industrial achievements. The Americans sent, and I'm not kidding, you can look this up, the Americans sent some stuffed animals. I don't mean fluffy toys, I mean animals they'd killed and then stuffed by taxidermists, and some guns they used to shoot the animals. That was it. That was the American contribution to industrial society in 1851. By 1890, the United States was the world's largest industrial power. Right? So what happened in that 40 years? Well, people, economic historians who've written about this, have coined the phrase the American system of manufacturing, in which what the US had available was a lot of relatively, I think the word unskilled should be used very, very carefully. They were not educated, they were not very experienced, but they were very strong in terms of potential skill, in terms of how much they could produce if you worked with them and helped them understand the tacit knowledge they needed to be productive in these factories. And that became a cornerstone of this increase in American productivity and in production. And the very, in retrospect, or through the lens of modern economics, or the economics of this moment, what we and many other people emphasize is new tasks. So you're automating, you're bringing machines to bear. The machines are replacing people, absolutely, but it's part of a broader industrial transformation in which you're creating new tasks. Those new tasks require some expertise. You need people to acquire that expertise, and you pay them for that expertise. And that's why you and me are paid anything more than a starvation wage, because you have expertise, that expertise is valuable to someone, and they need to pay to have that expertise. If the job doesn't require any expertise, you don't get a high wage, certainly not in where I live and not where you live. And there were also, it turned out, and I think this is fortuitous, I don't think this was anyone's clever design, there were positive global implications. So this American technology, sewing machines, farm equipment, and then automobiles, I'll come on to in a moment, spread around the world and became available in the UK, for example, became available in Europe. Higher wages were made possible by higher marginal productivity and the development of countervailing power, particularly the growth of the trade union movement, as well as an increased role for government. And if you want to pick one industry, I mean, there's lots of debate about this among economic historians, but what was the industry that really represents, that goes beyond what was done in textiles? Because I said textiles did not deliver a lot for the workers per se, not directly, the textile mechanization. And the mechanization of weaving did not deliver a lot of new tasks. If you want to pick one industry that was central to new task creation, tasks with expertise, I'm going with railways. Railways changed how people thought about distance, they changed the cost of transportation, they changed the kinds of work that you generated. Driving a railway engine, certainly driving George Stephenson's rocket, shown there in 1829, was a highly skilled job. And even driving these engines up into the 1880s, which that's top of the line engine from the 1880s. That was a skilled job, and you needed to pay these people a high wage in order to do that. Now, just to sort of press this point further, Henry Ford, who was not a nice person and whose beliefs were absolutely reprehensible on many dimensions, let me be very clear about that, was at the heart of the automation of car assembly in the United States. So Henry Ford brought car assembly onto the production line, and he brought electricity onto that production line. In the United States in 1900, the total number of cars that were produced was 10 or 20,000. There were a few thousand people working in the industry. In 1929, Ford and GM combined produced 2.9 million cars. There were 400,000 jobs in the auto industry. Many of those jobs were well paid. There was also a big additional, and slightly later, my union friends want me to emphasize, big push to unionize this industry, which, after a lot of strife, was ultimately successful and contributed to relatively high wages going into this post-war period for the United States. Now, this is a picture I'll come back to in a moment, or I'll come back to a version of this. The red line is the United States. This is nominal hourly wage. I'll talk about real wages in a minute. And I just want you to note the steady increase there. I also want you to note the Japanese nominal wages. Nominal wages are a little bit interesting or attractive here because I don't have to worry yet about what happened to a price index. I'm doing these based on market exchange rates, so this is how you think about global labor, for example. Japanese companies become highly competitive as suppliers to American industry, and there is not much rise in real wages in Japan until the 1970s, but then you see those wages do rise, and Japanese wages in terms of dollars per hour for low-skilled workers were comparable to the United States from the mid-1980s at least. On the bottom two lines, I've got China and India, and I'll come back to them. Just want you to note that they're not moving much there. These rising wages accompanied and were absolutely, in our view, an essential and actually, funnily enough, in the view of many industrialists and industrial leaders in the 1920s, in the 1950s, perhaps even into the 1960s, paying workers good wages was absolutely connected to an integral part of an industrial system in which what economists would call total factor productivity growth was initially very impressive and continued. There was a decline in those in the rate of TFP growth subsequent to the 1960s, but it still remained pretty respectable. There was a little bit of a surge in the 1990s in the United States linked to the IT information technology transformation, but that the trend continued to decline. But something has absolutely fundamentally changed. And what is it that's different now? And this is not something that changed recently. There's a change, I think you have to go back to the 1970s and 1980s, that for reasons we can talk about, there was a big shift in the vision around industry and around private enterprise, represented and most clearly articulated by Milton Friedman, in which the focus is on business is only, the only job of business is to increase its profits. Worker power can and should be eroded at every opportunity, including anti-union measures. Globalization, which I'll come back to in a moment, played an important role, and new digital technology contributed to this undermining of shared prosperity. So the balance of power shifted towards capital from labor. And if you think about it, I mean, many times you see a version of this graph and people say, this is unfortunate, or, you know, oh my goodness, what happened? I mean, if you go back and think in terms of ideological terms and think in political terms, this is exactly what Milton Friedman wanted. Shift the balance of power from labor to capital. Well, if you succeed on that, the share of labor in GDP should go down. So this is a mission accomplished to the Friedman version of capitalism, I would suggest, and very unfortunate for most of us. The US labor share, by the way, does remain a little bit high compared to some other countries, but not that much higher than most other places. And it could certainly also get pressed lower if you think about other regions of the world. Now, this is an awkward and somewhat difficult topic to discuss on this slide. Well, at least it would be if we were sitting in Beijing. I don't think it's awkward in London. We were asked by a number of publishers if they could publish Power and Progress in China. They said they just need to make some small changes to comply with the requirements of the censor. We said, show us the small changes. It's about a third of the book. So we said, no, thank you very much to that. So this is, now I've shifted from nominal wages. I wanted to show you that, put my cards on the table. This is real wages. So we can have plenty of discussion about which price index you use, using the right price index, and so on. You see a couple of things here. First of all, and we don't have a continuous series from the pre-war period, but you would see, and you can almost see the rising real wages of the United States, low-skilled workers until the early 1970s, and you can then see the stagnation that's subsequent to that for people at the low-skill end. That's very real. We still see the rising graph in the middle. That's Japan. So as Japan industrializes, as Japan becomes successful as an exporter, and as Japan comes under pressure to allow their exchange rate to appreciate, because they held their breath on that for most of the 1960s, you can see real wages in Japan rising up towards the US level. But look at the appropriately enough red line representing China. Now, I think you all remember Tiananmen Square, 1989. That happens to be the beginning of our data. If I had data before that, I would definitely show you. But there's, and the economic realities of the Chinese worker were absolutely difficult in many ways during the Great Leap Forward, during the Cultural Revolution, and so on. But into the 1980s, their real wages in China were probably roughly around the level of the green line, which you see there, which is India. At least I think there were I've seen no compelling evidence to say they were lower than what's in the green line. So after 1989, China takes off as a source of everything manufactured. This is the biggest shift. When we talk about globalization, when we talk about building global supply chains, when you look at this period, it's China in the 1990s, facilitated by Western capital, American companies, first and foremost, plenty of European companies also, if you want me to send you the names and addresses, I can, going into China, developing and manufacturing sources of supply, and increasingly finished product as well. And it's a remarkable success, absolutely on parallel with that of Japan. But what's missing in this picture? Any kind of real wage increase that matches that of Japan. Now, what happens to income distribution in China is a little bit complex. They have definitely reduced poverty. I think that's real. They also have extreme income inequality, at least according to the data, which you can spend a long time debating. The inequality in China is at or above the levels of Russia right now, income inequality. But I think the key thing is this class of industrial workers, the manufacturing low-skilled workers, their wages are kept low because the countervailing powers of either the British Industrial Revolution or the American unions in the 1930s or Japan. Japan does not have strong labor power. I think we can mostly agree on that. Pretty compliant labor, and yet when productivity increases enough, and when you've got enough new tasks being created for which you need the expertise, and you want to pay people to acquire that expertise and remain expert, that's genuine market pressure. That has not materialized in China. So that's a globalization context. Look, shared prosperity in all our societies, I think in every society represented in the room today, shared prosperity should be regarded as a solved problem. It was not a solved problem in 1780. It was not a solved problem, I think, in 1850s. It was still a struggle in the early, perhaps, 1900s. But the post-war period absolutely established how to combine mechanization, the right degree of automation, new task creation, the prevalence of countervailing powers with productive industry, an industry that could generate jobs. And you would remain somewhere around full employment as long as you didn't have a problem like that of the 1930s. But we gave it all up. So this is on the right is one of David Autor's favorite charts, showing what's happened to real earnings since 1963. Again, the start date is determined by comparable data availability, and this is for the United States. Similar patterns in other industrial countries, but obviously not exactly the same. So what you see here, the red line on the top right, high school dropout, is actually into the 2010s, earning no more than what they earned in the 1960s. Right? So that's the corollary of that other picture I showed you where real earnings have not gone up. Now, in contrary, if you've got some college, you might be a little bit ahead. College degree, you're definitely ahead, and a graduate degree, you've done even better. So this is the widening of income inequality from earnings in the United States. For women, it's the dispersion is a little bit less dramatic, and high school dropouts are earning more than the 60s, to be clear, but there's still been a great deal of dispersion. And there is a tremendous lack of opportunity, an erosion of opportunity for people who've not gone to college. So what's AI going to do? Because we're not adopting AI in the world of 1980, for example. We're adopting it in the world of the 2020s. Well, if artificial intelligence is a skill-biased technology, if it favors people like you, frankly, who have a lot of education, then you're going to have a further widening of this income inequality. When I talked to one group about this, a CEO, so this is not my term, this is the CEO's term, says, yes, you know what? The jobs we're going to eliminate with AI, in the next instance, are the cut and paste jobs, which is not a nice term. So don't use it. You can blame me. But what this person meant was the jobs that have a highly routine element, but they're not fully routine because otherwise they already would have been automated. And at least in some estimates of how much you're going to need by way of employment transitions, meaning if these people lose the cut and paste jobs, what's the rate at which we need to generate additional new opportunities? Can we do that? The estimates, for example, from McKinsey is that the US will need to continue with what we were doing before COVID, which is you can imagine is possible, but at least to them, Europe is going to have a harder time creating new jobs at that rate. And in addition, we have an enormous risk for misinformation, for a distortion of social media coming from the exact same technology with a big impact on democracy, a big potential impacts, in our view, on mental health and so on. So AI is absolutely going to displace labor through automation. It's an automation technology. And automation does not necessarily increase wages. That, I'm afraid, is the lesson from the early part of the British Industrial Revolution. But AI should also create new tasks requiring expertise, and that's what we should be focusing on, how to get more of that. And the good news is this happens in all these in our economies. 60% of US jobs in 2018, according to my colleague David Autor, didn't exist in 1940. So we do create new tasks all the time, but between 1980 and today, new tasks did not keep up with the loss of good jobs due to automation. It's not something that happens if you're just automatically not paying any attention. Okay, perhaps what happened between 1940 and 1980 was a little bit lucky. Certainly after 1980, that's not been the outcome. Now, you've probably seen, and I think this is a little bit like archaeology, if you don't mind me saying. One or two papers might change our view quite a lot on this point, but there is early work to be further validated and checked for sure, suggesting that AI can upskill workers, make them more skilled, increase their expertise, even if they start out with a relatively low level of education. So it can help you write faster, it can help you do programming, it can help you with customer service. Actually, the customer service evidence, very preliminary, is intriguing because it appears, at least in the study by Eric Brynjolfsson and others, that it improves your job quality, your job satisfaction as a customer service person, and you're able to provide better answers and be more helpful. So there's some potential intriguing win-wins here. And if we're focused on new task creation, and this is a important issue for policy discussions, I think the question then becomes, okay, what are the skills that are already there? What are the skills that people will automatically or naturally acquire by themselves? You don't have to worry about it too much. And where do we see gaps? Who's likely to be impacted? And what could you do about that? And some of the younger workers you can identify potentially, although there's lots of questions about whether you can operationalize this and whether this is something that can become a policy lever. Younger workers who are at risk, female workers who are at risk, there are various ways to quantify that. And this is also a really great field for further research, I think. Now, there are some there's a wide range of macroeconomic forecasts for the impact of AI on economic growth. And there are some very big brand names in the finance world and the consulting world saying that it will give you an additional 10 to 20% of world GDP. I think that is highly unlikely to be the case. The exposure of tasks to the kind of AI that we have now is not as great as assumed in some of these studies. But the AI is changing quickly. There's an enormous amount of money going, obviously, into this technology, and we shouldn't underestimate the potential displacement effects coming to us from this. I think our view, which we're happy to debate, is that of lined up with John Williams, who's the president of the New York Fed, saying this will be part of productivity growth. But it's not going to accelerate productivity growth beyond that current trend that I was talking about a moment ago. So how would we get worker-friendly AI? So worker-friendly AI would be AI that boosts the productivity of electricians, of plumbers, of other skilled craft workers. It could be helpful to nurses of all kinds, people working in the medical line, and I'm sure we could expand that list. The debate or some of the ideas that have been kicked around in the United States are using the convening power of the government and some resources to create grand challenges. The US Department of Defense was very influential in shaping the development of self-driving cars, which is, I think, not an unmixed blessing at all. We could do the same thing for education, for healthcare, for government services. You could help consumers become more empowered. Stronger protections for workplace surveillance. If your employer, for sure, is thinking about surveilling you more at work than they may be doing already, if that makes you safer, well, maybe you're willing to consider that. If that's an invasion of your privacy, which it almost certainly is or will be, then that's something I think that requires more conversation. And figuring out how to use AI across levels of government is something that should be an absolute priority. But none of this is going to happen by itself. All of it requires if anything is going to happen, you'd require a pretty big shift in corporate norms. Replacing workers, seeing them as an opportunity to cut costs is the natural default for certainly American industry. And helping workers articulate their needs in terms of training and what would they benefit from, that's also something that we work on and I think has some big potential. But as mentioned a moment ago, the quality of our democracy, again, I'll just speak about the United States, is already a little bit in difficulty, and misinformation, disinformation from AI is just going to exacerbate that.